All right, great to be back tonight. Minority Leader Bruce Tarr. And these are some difficult times. But when we left last week, you were very optimistic about where the Massachusetts budget was, and you had some great things to lead on and talk about. So let's pick it up from there. Where are we with respect to the budget and what's happening?
So, Rick, the Senate has just completed the busiest week of the entire year, and that is when we debate the budget for the upcoming fiscal year. And that debate took place this past week on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. We finished late yesterday afternoon, and it is now more than a $50 billion budget, but that's because we have additional resources, because tax revenues are exceeding projections and benchmarks upon which the budget is based. And there are a lot of very positive things in this spending document. There are, for instance, a tremendous increase in Chapter 70, educational aid for our K through 12 schools. There is a significant increase for the circuit breaker program, which now pays for excess amounts of special education costs and transportation costs for special education, which can actually exceed the cost of tuition for outplaced students. There's something that I'm very proud of in this budget, and that is a $6 million grant program to help schools with social emotional learning issues, which we knew before the pandemic were important, but we understand it in a much different way now, in a more intense way. There's money for nursing homes. There's money, additional money, a significant increase for unrestricted general government aid, which we call in layman's terms local aid, to help cities and towns. So there's a lot of positive things that are happening in this budget, and that's because we have the ability to do it. We have the resources right now to be able to spend, and we'll likely have even more as the year goes by. So that's important. On the downside, I think it's unfortunate that we weren't able to find the opportunity or capitalize on the opportunity to do something for taxpayers, either suspend the gas tax or increase the renter's deduction or increase the senior circuit breaker to help folks who are older be able to stay in their homes with regard to their tax burden. I lobbied hard for that. I argued for that. I was not successful. I do think it's interesting for anyone that thinks that it's a partisan issue that twice as many Democrats supported my amendments as Republicans. So all of the Republicans supported them, and we got Democrats as well. And that, at this point, is going to have to be a discussion for another day. The Senate president has indicated that she wants to consider some form of tax relief moving forward. And as recently as today, the Speaker of the House is reportedly saying something similar. So we did a lot of good things in this budget. I'm very pleased with it, but I wish it had some additional dimensions.
When would money start to be realized locally?
Well, that's a great question. So the fiscal year for Massachusetts begins on July 1st. So our goal is to have the budget completed and onto the governor's desk before that. Now, historically, we generally come pretty close to that date. We don't always make it exactly, but we come pretty close. And so after the budget is signed into law by the governor, that's when you start to see money flow. So sometime, maybe mid-July, is when resources will start to come. And the municipal budgets are predicated in many ways on the timing of the state budget so that there can be some harmony there between those two. So we'll start seeing the dollars fairly soon.
I want to ask you a question about two things that may or may not be related, and that is lobsters and outdoor dining.
Well, two great questions, and actually maybe they are related in some ways. But if we're successful with the lobster catch, then we can have some outdoor dining. But let me start with the second one first, Rick. You know, one of the things that we've experienced in the pandemic is the tool of outdoor dining, which has really been helpful to a lot of our restaurants through the darkest days of the pandemic. People have embraced it. It is representing, according to the Mass Restaurant Association, a lot of the income of restaurants because of the additional capacity, because people want to use that capacity. And right now, outdoor dining is still available. It's been extended, but I think it should be a permanent part of the landscape. So I had offered an amendment that would allow municipalities by local option, without the state telling them they have to do that, allowing them to be able to make outdoor dining permanent. And that amendment did not pass. largely because it was felt we don't need it yet. We've got the extension in place, but it's something that I want to come back to. On the other hand, with regard to lobster, I think most folks are familiar, Rick, and if not, I'll explain it for a moment, that due to a lot of federal regulations, a lot of court issues that are going on, lobstermen in Massachusetts right now have to stop fishing between February and mid-May. And that's because there's a fear that during that time, right whales are in our waters and they could become entangled with lobster gear. And so the solution right now, because we don't have a better one to be able to address that, is to force everyone to take all of their lobster gear out of the water. So that turns a 4-month closure into something that's more like a 5 or 6 month closure, because it takes a while to put the traps in and it takes a while to take them out. So we have to find a way to help fishermen survive. So because it's very difficult. I don't know any of us that could say we're going to forego 4 or 5 months of income or 6 months of income and still be able to survive. So there were a couple of things that we proposed in the budget. The first one was to create something that looks like the PUA program that we had during the pandemic, to say that for lobstermen that are regularly engaged in the fishery, we're going to give you $1 per trap per month. And so just so you know, we're not talking about a large amount of money, because the most traps you can fish in Massachusetts is 800. So the most money someone would get is $800 a month to help them pay their bills while they can't fish. That costs about $14 million, and we weren't able to incorporate it in this version of the budget. But what we did do, and this is an amendment that I offered, was create a $500,000 loan program, or grant program, I should say, to be able to give them some money to help with the cost of the new gear that they have to use. They are now required to use rope that is weak so that it can break if there's an entanglement. And in some cases, the rope itself isn't what's weak, but links that get put into it that also have the same properties that can break if enough tension is put on them. And there's some buoys and some other things. And we were saying in this budget that we want to help the lobstermen with those costs. So we got the program started, and it would be funded under my amendment, which is part of the Senate budget, and as we've talked about, has to make it through the entire process. But it would create a $500,000 that would go to work to help them survive these challenging times.
Finally, Senator, talk.com, I'm going to link to that this week. You have a very impassioned speech that you gave on the Senate floor, and I wonder if you could
Sure, Rick. So, it's important when we talk about the budget and we talk about debate in the Senate, it's important to talk about individual amendments, individual items, but it's also important to talk about the culture of the Senate and the spirit that we bring to it. And what I was saying in my final remarks during the budget is that, we live in a country where there's so much emphasis on division, and there are so many forces that try to pull us all in different directions and try to make us confrontational with each other. But in the Massachusetts Senate, we have just gone through 3 days, 3 very long days, where people of different parties with different perspectives from different parts of the state together and engaged in an ongoing conversation. And that conversation was respectful, it was productive, and it was something that I think should be cherished and something that we need to carry on as a tradition of the Massachusetts Senate. And I really think that there are a lot of things that we can't control, but as senators, we can control how we conduct ourselves, how we operate in the chamber, how we represent the people that we're sent here to represent. And I think this past week was a sterling example of how things could be and should be, as opposed to all too often how they are.